Good morning. My name is Carla Marinucci, and I'm senior writer for Politico's California Playbook. I'm joined today by my co-author, Jeremy B. White, and we're teaming up for this California Playbook virtual conversation with Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. Thank you, Mayor. It's great having you. So Southern California is going to be reopening soon, all the way. LA has already started, from access to beaches and local businesses in Hollywood. So today we're going to be talking to Mayor Garcetti about that, the reopening, COVID testing, and also police reform, social justice protests, etc. But Jeremy, we got something new going on here today too.
That's right, Carla. Before we get started with Mayor Garcetti, we're trying out a new feature at Politico Live. We want to know from all of you watching on Politico.com, what's the one public event, concert, or gathering you can't wait to attend once the COVID crisis is over? Mine is going and getting dim sum again, although I should probably also see my mom, who's probably watching. Hi, Mom. So type in your answer to the question about what you're missing under the live stream on Politico.com, where there's a text box. And at the end of our interview with Mayor Garcetti, we will share your responses. We are also opening it up for audience questions at the end. You can submit one to us by tweeting at Politico Live with the hashtag AskPolitico.
Okay, let's get started. Mayor, thank you so much for being with us.
Sure.
Look, we wanted to start, there was an extraordinary 2-hour meeting last night in Los Angeles between representatives of Black Lives Matter and city council members over the issue of defunding the police. As you know, Black Lives Matter People's Budget calls for slashing funding to LAPD and investing in housing and other priorities, mental health and so forth. And that is a big shift in priorities for a department with 10,000 officers. Can we get your reaction to the proposal, and what, if any part of it, can you support? What's your thoughts about this proposal?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to see you both. I'm sorry virtually. I'd love to be in person with you. That's what I'll put in my comments, hanging out with you guys. But I really do think this is a moment for us to meet and not to miss. And it's a moment to listen and to lead. So I'm certainly listening not only to what the People's Budget says in Los Angeles, but what we're hearing from folks that are on the ground and have been for years, intervening in stopping violence, in investing in Black communities and communities of color. And I think we have to widen that out, that this isn't about a single budget. You ask, people, what does defund the police mean? You ask 3 people, you'll get 3 different opinions. But I think what is crystal clear to all of us is that we are underfunding Black communities, whether it's economic development, whether it's education, whether it's health, and other communities of color. Poverty is concentrated by color in this country. Poverty is concentrated by geography. If we're going to step up to this moment, we have to look at all budgets, including police budgets. And then there's a second question about what is the fundamental business of policing? Is it that we should throw everything on the shoulders of our police officers? You go solve homelessness, you go respond to a mental health crisis, you intervene in a problem with a youth at a school? Or do we look at non-policing responses so that we can save police officers for those truly violent acts in our society where we need them to be guardians, and also transform that culture from kind of the gladiator mentality to guardian mentality? So we're leading, we're taking money from all departments, but including the police department, and putting that into things like summer youth jobs, looking at trauma-based care. And it's important for folks who are advocating to remember cities aren't the only place to do this. Often counties are where the big budgets are for social services, healthcare, for those interventions that we need, and our school districts, which we have underfunded in places like California for way too long.
Mr. Mayor, sticking with the topic of policing, the Los Angeles Police Protective League, the union representing rank and file officers, has come out in support of some reform proposals, probably most importantly, a national database of officers fired for misconduct. I'm curious to know your sense of whether those reforms go far enough. And then in terms of getting it done, the police union attacked you pretty directly recently, even going so far as to call for your removal. Do you think that type of animosity impedes reform efforts? So 2-part question.
Sure.
Do these reforms go far enough, and can you get them done given that rocky relationship?
Yeah, this is not a time to be defensive. This is a time to lead. I reached out, and it was one member of their board who said that. The other folks who have been on the union, I was proud that they actually put out something right away that condemned what happened in Minneapolis, that they put something forward of 3 very important reforms. But no, I have a much more expansive program than that. And we've been doing much more. And oftentimes we've had police unions stand in the way of those necessary reforms that make sure that bad officers don't get passed from place to place, that disciplinary records can actually be seen and in the light of day. So we're doing not only the 8 can't wait, 5 of which we've finished and 3 which are almost done. We're looking at so much more around making sure that we can embrace bringing a culture to departments that even when they're so-called good departments, still is too embedded across America, that allows people, as I said, to kind of have that gladiator training rather than a guardian mentality. And we have some super examples in Los Angeles of ways we've transformed that, something called the Community Safety Partnership that puts officers in a neighborhood for 5 years. They really get to know the names of the people that they police, and vice versa. The community who pays their paychecks knows who that local officer is. They engage in door knocks as much as responding to 911 calls. And to get back to my earlier point, I hope that our unions too can get behind the idea that maybe we shouldn't have everything shouldering on the backs of our police officers, especially when we see great examples from Eugene, Oregon, for instance, in the Cahoots program that rolls out people that when there's a problem in a homeless encampment or a mental health issue, get experts in mental health. We can train officers to be more conscious of mental health like we do here in Los Angeles, but at the bottom line, that's not who they are. They're not mental health workers. So I think that's not something to fear, and I hope that they will be at the table and get past kind of any rhetoric and division, because this is a moment of common ground. We saw George Floyd die, and everybody had common ground in America saying this is wrong. Let's find the common ground on step 2 now as well.
Sorry, just a brief follow-up, Mr. Mayor. The Attorney General, Javier Becerra, yesterday backed legislation to decertify officers accused of gross misconduct. He said he would seek state legislation, but it's also something locals could pick up. Is that something that you think might fly in Los Angeles, decertifying officers who have committed gross misconduct?
Absolutely. I support that 100%. I think that it's been a problem. We've seen people who clearly violated the law and policy. They're recommended to be disciplined, terminated, and or prosecuted, and then they're reinstated. They don't get prosecuted. We don't see justice served. I also think that police shooting should be in the hands of an independent prosecutor, whether that's the Attorney General's office or a local or statewide independent prosecutor. And my father was head of the 1st Division as a deputy DA that used to prosecute police brutality in the old LAPD. I grew up with these stories around the dinner table where, an officer, when he'd explain that what they're going to roll out to investigate, would say, if you were dying on the streets bleeding, I would step over you and let you die. I mean, the hostility that was in the old LAPD and that still sometimes has echoes today, this is not something that officers should fear. They should embrace it, because this is a moment to reinvest and to reinvigorate in what the idea of what that badge is. It is to be a guardian and to protect, not to go after somebody because of the color of their skin, not to protect bad apples and other people. And it's really not just the bad apples, it's to fundamentally replace what the barrel is that they're in right now.
And Mayor, I know you have a limited time. I want to move on to the COVID crisis. Los Angeles County, as you know, remains California's leading hotspot. Last Thursday, we had a single day high, 1,800 cases. At the same time, the county is opening up gyms, fitness centers, and so on. What's the one thing that keeps you up at night when you're thinking about trying to balance economic recovery on one hand and the responsibility to limit the spread of the pandemic on the other? Give us your thoughts on that.
So, I'm proud that we led early, and I know that we saved, thousands of lives we'll never be able to count, but I'm very nervous about the speed with which things are opening. A city doesn't have necessarily the ability to hold that back. The state permits what can open, the counties then decide what will open. And there's no point in holding back an individual city when someone can go across the street and work out at the gym in the neighboring city. So the Bay Area has done a good job of all those 8 counties moving together. I do think that, there's not a second spike coming. There's really never been a falling down from the plateau. We went up and we plateaued and stayed at that plateau. We are very rigorous with testing, probably the most rigorous and available testing in the country of a big city for both symptomatic and asymptomatic people. But the thing that keeps me up is whether people, it's not so much the openings, we're gotten smarter about how to do this, but will people actually just be exhausted and say, I'm not going to wear the mask.
Yeah.
I'm going to hang out with 20 friends in the backyard. Nobody's going to know about it. I'm going to get 3 feet close and, to somebody because look, I haven't gotten sick yet. What's the worst thing could happen? If people aren't disciplined about washing hands, wearing masks, keeping distance, staying at home still whenever you can, we will see not just, I think, a continuation of this plateau, but we will see more cases and more tragically, more deaths coming out of this in the next month or two.
Yeah.
The governor was asked yesterday about this balance between public health and economic damage, and he suggested that there are public health considerations to keeping people locked down for too long, people who are struggling with poverty, losing access to healthcare, that type of thing. I'm curious to know about your take on that, of whether there is sort of a public health risk of keeping the lockdown in place too long or too stringently.
No question. I mean, I think everybody feels that. I think the protests were fueled in many ways by everybody saying, let me out of here. And it's just a tough thing that nobody's gone through. On the economic front, absolutely. I mean, their health follows how much material benefits you have. And when you're suffering, your health indicators, people weren't going to hospitals for necessary procedures. People were scared about getting COVID-19 by going to emergency rooms. So there is absolutely an important part of that. This is an excruciating middle. Everybody wants, at the beginning of this, black or white. Close it all down, open it all up. When in reality, nothing was ever fully closed and nothing will ever be fully reopened until we have a cure. That said, living in the gray requires a lot of us to look at not only the nuance, but what are the effects of this when we do keep things closed? The reason why we have said, okay, fine, we'll go along with opening some of these places up is, why should the hairdresser across the street from Orange County not get to have her livelihood and maybe never get her store, her barbershop or beauty salon back up and running? So I do think that it is really important for us to widen what public health is. And to bring it back to your first questions, racism is a public health crisis. So I think public health, really, we've learned so much. We were very naive about public health in America before COVID-19. And we've really learned that public health is about the economy, public health can be about racism, and public health is about our own behavior. And I hope that we build an infrastructure, not just at the government level, but at the personal and community level, to deal with public health long after this is done. Homelessness is a public health crisis that long predated this. So for me, it's been a very effective way of communicating. People want to save lives. And once you say that, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's homeless lives where people are dying 3 a day on the streets of Los Angeles, or whether it's COVID-19 and we're seeing our loved ones pass away, I think this is really hitting us very deeply as human beings.
I think we might as well throw in a question from a reader on that subject, Mayor. One of our readers says that COVID-19 has decimated the undocumented community around LA, especially street vendors. You've announced an outdoor dining plan, but you've left out street vendors. This reader says, how will these people survive? What's your answer to that?
We're moving forward with street vendors being able to go back to business. Many of them have been in business during this, and there's been relaxed enforcement of that, but we're absolutely, it's a critical piece. We finally became a city that had street vending laws. We were the last city, I think, in America to have them. And it is very important to me that they not only be able to get back to work, get a paycheck, get the dollars that are there on the streets, but also to be health leaders. So I don't want to just say you can go back and be open. I want to make sure that they have PPE, that they know what that is, that there's masks, that they are thinking about their customers and spacing them out on the street, just as restaurants are. So we are, and our council member, Monica Rodriguez, just put forward a motion on that. I hope to be able to sign soon, moving forward with that, because it's a critical part of our economy.
Let's move on to elections. That's something I'm sure our watchers are interested in. So, as I'm guessing people who are tuning in are aware of, there's a big district attorney race going on in Los Angeles. The incumbent, Jackie Lacey, is facing a challenge from the left from progressive and former San Francisco DA George Gascon. Mr. Mayor, you suggested last week that it, quote, may be time for a change. Have you lost faith in Jackie Lacey? Are you reconsidering your position in this race?
I'm looking closely at it. Jackie is somebody I've been friendly with for a while. I endorsed her before George Gascon got into the race, and he's somebody I have tremendous respect for. I worked with him when he was in Los Angeles Police Department, has always been a very forward-thinking person. Right now I'm very focused on not only rising to this moment in terms of racial justice and equity, but of course getting us through this pandemic and the economy. But I will turn to the race in the coming weeks.
You also said in that interview, oh, I'm sorry, Carla, that, quote, a badge does not protect you and that there's an obligation for prosecutors to prosecute law enforcement. Do you feel in the last however many years that it has been too much the case that a badge has protected officers from facing repercussions?
I do believe that. And I do believe that responsibility is with all of us, everybody listening here, from not just those who put forward cases in disciplinary systems and police departments, not only prosecutors who too often don't prosecute, but when you do, the judges and juries. Juries, Americans across this country are very unlikely to convict police officers. And it's tough. I understand that. We are raised with police officers supposed to be heroes. They're almost superhuman. On the flip side, for other communities, it's the opposite. A police officer is somebody who seems like a threat to you. And when you get people on a jury, I think we have to kind of make sure that we're not just looking at the badge, but we're looking at the behavior. And crimes are crimes. When you violate the law, you violate the law. And when you're entrusted with a gun by the people to be able to use that and take a life, it better have met policy, and it better have been an ethical act. If it's not, there better be a penalty.
Mr. Mayor, you're, of course, Joe Biden's campaign co-chair. You're assisting him on the vetting process for the VP. What can you tell us about it, Mr. Mayor? What are you doing on that front? Where's the process right now? And are you worried the Democrats are going to get overconfident, being that the polls are looking, him with a double-digit lead right now?
I'm always worried about overconfidence. And I say, even when you have a double-digit lead, you should be campaigning like you're the 20-point underdog. So that's certainly something that we in the Biden campaign feel and are working very hard. I've been working really hard to make sure we get all the voices of progressives, Latinos, African Americans that I think need to be part of the wide coalition to win. In terms of vice presidency search, I'm all information in, I'm all ears, and no information out. But the four of us who are co-chairs are working very closely with the vice president. There's some superb women out there, and it's just an honor to be a small part of writing that chapter of history. I do believe that we can win. We can have the first sitting woman vice president in American history, but it will be the best person for the job, man or woman. And I think that one that will rise to the occasion. What Joe Biden told us at the beginning of this, and I can share this, is he's really looking for not a political choice or a demographic or a geographic choice. He's looking for the sort of relationship he had with Barack Obama, where that person who gives you that last piece of advice in the most critical question, keeps her counsel to herself with you, but then can also take on big things. Think about when Joe Biden took on the Recovery Act. He's going to need somebody who helps rebuild from this triple public health crisis of COVID-19, an economy that's decimated, and racial justice in America. So I know that he'll make the right choice. And I know that everybody will see that there's a very clear choice in November about moving this country towards healing and restoring its soul, or 4 more years of this division and hatred and incompetence.
Without asking you to name names, because I know you're trying to be discreet, is it possible that somebody considered has a name that rhymes with Mama Maris?
You're a poet, and I didn't even know it. Yeah, it's possible. I've read that actually in Politico. I've read that I get most of my information on politics from Politico, and I've read that name there. I think something that rhymes with that for sure.
More seriously, Mr. Mayor, before we get off this topic, while we're talking about elections, have to talk about conducting a general election during a pandemic. During the primary, as you know, there were a lot of long lines in LA. Board of Supervisors was really pushing the registrar to move to mailing a ballot to every voter. And we heard about how the logistics of that would be very complicated, particularly given the requirement that you still have in-person balloting centers. Now that it's a state mandate that LA moves to mailing ballots to every voter while also maintaining in-person places, how tricky are the logistics for that? Are you concerned that it's going to be tough to pull off, and that if so, that'll suppress turnout?
I'm worried about this across the country. I mean, any change is really tough for voters to know about. I mean, most of us have very, very busy lives, and then suddenly you realize it's election day the night before, and you're like, where do I go? What do I do? And so this requires an almost census-like approach of, I think, mass education, letting people know, especially with trusted community partners in multiple languages, in areas where people are. And as you said, it's much tougher because it can't necessarily be face-to-face, but we better be flooding, social media. We better be flooding, people's mailboxes, and really teaching people how to vote by mail if they've never done it before, where voting centers are. And absolutely, it's my expectation that Los Angeles County will step up and make that effective. I stood with my wife in line. She was probably one of the last voters in LA County, and I think she voted at 9:30 or 10.
Yeah.
It took her 3 hours to vote. That's absolutely unacceptable. We should always be making voting easier. And as we see in other states, there's a conscious manipulation of make it difficult, and maybe we got a shot of reelecting the president. That is absolutely undemocratic. That is absolutely counter to who we are as Americans. I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat or independent, we should all be fighting for the most basic right, which is that we get to vote.
Mayor, I know we only have a second left with you. I just want to throw out that last question that we threw out to our audience. You're an accomplished jazz musician, what's a pianist. What's the one public event or concert or gathering you can't wait to go to when this is all over?
I think it's to go to the Hollywood Bowl and jazz concert and just to feel the beauty of this city around me. That is something that I will look forward to. It probably won't be till next summer, but I think that's the one thing. And I invite everybody to come. Hopefully it's 2021 season at the Hollywood Bowl.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mayor Garcetti. So good to be with you. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. We appreciate it.
As always. Take care.
Thanks.
Turning now to our audience, we are still waiting on your audience responses to come up on our question from the top. In the meantime, let's dive into what's ahead in California this week in policy and politics. When it comes to Sacramento, I think the budget is the main thing we're watching. Lawmakers passed a sort of placeholder deal yesterday, a placeholder budget yesterday, but the real negotiations continue with Governor Newsom. Lawmakers want to avert some of the cuts the governor's proposed, which are dependent on federal money to avert. So that's kind of the main thing I'm watching this week in policy and politics. Carla, any other particular ones?
You know, I think what the mayor brought up with regard to social justice and policing is something we're seeing reflected all over California. We saw Mayor London Breed this week talk about how she wants to reform her police department so that calls related to homelessness, mental illness, family disputes, for instance, are not handled by armed officers, but maybe perhaps another level of response. That's the kind of approach I think we're going to be watching all over California. And I think, of course, LA, being the nation's second largest city, is the place, is the center of this. So what Mayor Garcetti had to say on that was really important in terms of how Black Lives Matter is working with the city council in the sense of having a dialogue finally. And the kind of dialogue they had this week, I think was really significant. On the budget, Jeremy, I think you're right. We've also seen a number of legislators sort of chafe at what they've said is Governor Gavin Newsom's unbridled power is what they're saying. Is he going to take more flack on that from the legislature? Are they going to keep testing him on this front?
I think it's clear that they see the budget as a arena in which to sort of reassert some control. I explicitly heard lawmakers yesterday during debate in the Assembly. The Republican budget chair said, while there are elements of this budget I disagree with, he was happy that the legislature was sort of taking back some of that authority and saying no to the governor on certain things. So I think, Carla, no doubt you are right. I think any elected official wants to feel like they are important and part of the process. And I think a lot of lawmakers feel like they've been kind of cut out in the months since this pandemic began. So certainly I think the budget you were seeing the legislature reassert.
I think one other aspect of the reopening that is going to be really important, small businesses and other groups are really starting to get nervous about how this reopening is happening. Absolutely. They want it to happen faster. As you pointed out, Gavin Newsom is trying to balance this. Garcetti obviously is too, and major businesses as well. Hollywood now this week is now going back to business in terms of film and television production. The guilds and unions there have agreed on a very detailed agreement as to how that is going to happen. And it is really amazing to look at it when you're talking about a business that relies on people to people and close contact and live audiences. All of these things are part of the challenge, I think, ahead for California, and something Gavin Newsom is going to have to deal with as well. He hasn't addressed Hollywood as much, but when you're talking about his business and economic task force headed by Tom Steyer, I'm hearing a lot of business people saying, where's the beef here? We want more details now.
Right. There's no doubt that if LA is the single largest source of COVID cases, it's also a key engine of the California economy. So how much California recovers and how fast is going to be dependent in large part on what LA does. We only have a few minutes left. So now we would like to turn to some of the audience responses we received from the question we asked you at the top, which, if you recall, was what's the one public event, concert, or gathering you can't wait to attend once the COVID crisis is over. So taking a look at some audience responses, the Hollywood Bowl, which was the mayor's answer as well.
And that's, look, the Hollywood Bowl is the iconic place I mean, I can't recall how many great performances I've seen there. I think so many people in LA, to Angelinos, this is the thing that's going to say, yes, we're back.
Indeed.
That and other live performances. We're talking about Coachella, other major festivals, and whether it's Outside Lands, whether it's Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, whether it's the Metropolitan Opera, the San Francisco Opera, the LA Opera. For me, those are the performances I want to get back to.
Some other responses here, workout classes. I think that's probably a pretty widespread one. The theater, which Carlo, you mentioned opera, fine arts, and of course, Dodgers games. I think most of us are pretty ready for some baseball to come back. I'm sure Dodgers fans, after
Oakland
last
A's.
time they saw their team, they were losing in the NLDS to the world champion Washington Nationals, would like to see their team get back to it. So I can fully understand that. So yeah. And Carlo, yours is the opera, yes?
Mine's the opera, but I do think, look, sports events, when you're talking about soccer and some Major League Baseball, people are dying to get back to this stuff. Those are big money interests here in California. And when you're talking about the stadiums that are going up in LA, and when you're talking about the new Warriors Arena up here in San Francisco, big money at stake, and Gavin Newsom better figure out when that's going to happen, don't you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. The governor has been very cautious on the sports question from the beginning. I don't know if you remember, but way back before anything shut down, he basically said, unprompted, why are these sports leagues still open? Why are they not protecting their players? And he's still been pretty cautious about it. And Mayor Garcetti, too, I think has been pretty consistent that until we get a vaccine, until we get herd immunity, at least spectators in the seats for big events, we're not there. So I would watch baseball without fans. I would watch pretty much anything right now, but I think major events like concerts and sports still seem like they're a good ways off. But you can dream, gives you something to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. One last thing, I know we got to go, but essentially, I thought the mayor's comments on the election are interesting. He's got a big role with Joe Biden's campaign. I would love to hear what's going on in that VP vetting session.
And I should also say, of course, he wasn't going to answer us on this, but a big California politics story looking ahead. If Kamala Harris was the pick and Joe Biden wins, who gets Kamala Harris's Senate seat? I don't think anybody expected she would be outlasted by Dianne Feinstein, but we could see a situation where suddenly we have an open Senate seat in California.
Yes, that is going to be the fight of the century.
Yeah. There's no doubt there are plenty of candidates who would happily put their hand up for that U.S. Senate seat.
Yes.
Open U.S. Senate seat doesn't happen that often.
Yes, so somebody put Mayor Garcetti in that ring as well. So
no doubt.
I appreciate that. Well, I think that's all the time we have, Jeremy, today. I enjoyed the conversation about California politics with Mayor Eric Garcetti. And if you all enjoyed it and you don't already receive the California Playbook, which is our must-read daily briefing on California politics, in your invite, I invite you to subscribe. You can sign up for the California Playbook newsletter by going to politico.com/newsletters/California Playbook. Thanks to everybody that tuned in today.